So these parts here were part of a prototype system that I was making here, and I'm going to finish it on this car. I'm going to get rid of this because the AC guy put that on there, but it's all computer controlled. So you got an evaporator core in there, and I'm using a really high power 18,000 BTU AC compressor for my air to water system. But the air to water system also has additional brushless coolant pumps, because see this, I'm going to weld some fittings on so it works with the triple pass radiator for this car from CSF Radiators. It's going to have some badass brushless spall fans on there. And what this enables me to do is a couple things. For one, fluid heat extraction. So I pump ice water, pulse width modulated. This goes between the radiator and the engine. And so in addition to having a really good cooling system, I have additional cooling capacity for the engine, for the transmission return line. So using a big transmission cooler in the back with fans that goes next to the condenser for the water system, I make a bunch of ice water. And so this thing is full of ice water, so is the air to water intercooler. And then what you end up with is a system that can control all the temperatures on the car. And so I have an LSA oil pan that also has, it's been powder coated, but it has an oil cooler on it. And so that oil cooler is going to have pulse width modulated, ice water. And that's going to help totally regulate the temperature of the oil, preventing oxidation, helping it last longer. But it's going to have two filters, because I've got the regular filter, but plumbed into the block is a pressure line. The pressure line comes from a bigger military spec pump. And I even considered making some billet sleeves so I can water cool the pumps. This scavenger pump pulls from the oil pan. I'm probably going to hook it to the drain plug. And then the factory return hose, or the factory oil level sensor, I could put the oil level sensor in the tank and just extend the harness, or, just use that on a factory car. But, there's a filter that goes to the tank. And so as this pulls oil from the oil pan, it fills up the tank through a big ass filter, big ass Wix filter on the bottom. And then boom. And so what you end up with is a constant loop of oil filtering. And so the oil is always being filtered by this pump, and the pressure pump primes the engine prior to allowing it to start. And so now you have a mechanical pump doing most of the work, and then this one just supplements the minimum amount of oil flow to maintain your commanded pressure. But this can respond to throttle position, boost pressure, nitrous. It also disables any changes in oil pressure due to viscosity, and allows for different bearing clearances and lower volume oil pumps. And so if I wanted to run a lower volume dart pump into one of these, I even considered making a thrust bearing oil squirter so that I can increase the volume of the system, and using restricted push rods from Manton, keep a lot of that oil out of the top end, but use this for running thinner oil, as well as extra lubrication for different conditions. So like if I'm on the trans brake, for example, the system go into max cool. And so it'll max cool the engine, max cool the transmission, max cool the fuel if I want. And so I could try cooling the pump gasoline, and see how that affects it. I'm not sure about, ethanol, because if I make the ethanol too cold and also have intake air temperatures that are essentially water temperatures with the ProMod intercooler, that would be a problem. And so we got Dakota Digital. We've got our, that's our throttle body right there with the V-band from Motion Raceworks. And so the car, I'm using a bunch of JMD tubes, clamps, we're going to use some of those bulkhead fittings from Motion Raceworks for all the water. And it's going to be a pretty cool daily driver with paddle shifters, traction control, and get it all cleaned up and out here driving around to showcase some of these inventions. And so, these pumps are supposed to work. This should handle over 100 PSI continuously, and has a very high amount of hours because it's a military spec version of that pump. So, this was a system where something like a Trailblazer like vehicle could benefit. And so, if you just hook this up to, say, a Trailblazer, it eliminates the need for AccuSumps and dry sumps. And so much, much cheaper than dry sump setup, yet it was going to be a universal kit I call the E-Sump, where you could plug it into your coil, one of your coils, you tap into, it'll come with a breakout harness based on your application, and then the hoses required to mount it wherever it was going to be convenient per application. But things like my water box, I wanted to make custom fit water boxes that would go in the trunk and have their own 12-volt compressor, and then using high amperage billet alternators that are 325 amps, to run the whole system. And so, water cooling that would affect every single fluid, total oil control in a way that would prevent any form of engine failure due to engine starvation and give total control for any factors. And so taking away bearing clearances as a concern was the idea as well, where somebody starting up a brand new race engine would never have to worry about the bearing clearances and oil pump selection. And so you put in a standard or reduced volume pump if you want, or whatever you feel like, and then it also gives you some control in terms of what types of viscosities you're on, because you don't have to worry about oil pressure or cavitation anymore. And with the redundancy, this works at dry sump systems to prime the engine and produce a backup. So like if you had a belt issue or the pump failed, if you had an oil pump failure, because the electric pump taps into the block after the mechanical pump there and the whole system is constantly filtered, you would know based on a duty cycle change the nature of the failure. However, it would not hurt the engine, and so it would prevent that metal and debris from making it into the bearings. And so that's the way it would work. And the way that I was routing the system, you could have even the scavenger pump fail, because it would then just start pulling oil backwards. And so, ultimately, with all the redundancy, it was just a way to prevent, any form of oil system failure, as well as cavitation, as well as the mechanical limitations of all the existing systems like AccuSumps and dry sumps. And so priming the engine, computer control, taking care of things like front sump oil systems. It was universal, that it could work on any car, and the total cost would be much, much lower than even an entry-level dry sump. And so those are some of the things that people told me were crazy, but I'm like, well, why would it be crazy to get control of the temperatures of the engine and then take that heat and dump it out the back of the car with a couple brushless or big ass ball fans and a condenser, and just have a very efficient system? Because heat exchanging with fluids is a much more efficient means to augment cooling. And with this intercooler here, that thing produces intake air temperatures right at the water temperature. And so this is just going to be my real efficient setup for showcasing and testing, and I jet hot coated everything. And so I really wanted to make this a show car and do some aero and stuff like that, but some of the business challenges, this project got kind of sidelined. But it's really just cool cold side, some wiring, some hoses, and a couple things that I got to replace that were stolen. But wanted to finish the front end with some cleanup work and patch up all the holes and paint this thing back to its original color, and finish the cold side stuff with the recirculating blow-off valves. There's an intake system I was going to make with some big brake ducts and Wilwood brakes and BC forged NA wheels, and make it a really nice, clean daily driving Foxbody with the stock hood, and everything would fit and it would look factory fresh, but under 3,000 pounds with all that extra weight on the back. That's the idea, putting all this on the back axle and having traction control at the same time, and a badass suspension under the back. I thought that this would be a really fun car to drive around, with some paddle shifters and 18-inch wheels with 335 drag radials on the back, and make it look like a ultimate sleeper. Tint out the windows, get some 6x9s back in there, and a stereo, an air conditioning system, and picture me rolling.